So, my name is William Smith. We're going to be talking about managing third-party applications with profiles. This is my chicken. So, earlier this year I was speaking with a coworker, and we were both talking about our upcoming presentations at Macworld. And I mentioned to him about the demo gods, making a sacrifice to the demo gods. And for a lot of folks who have ever given presentations, if you've ever given a demo in your presentation, you know that at some point something will go horribly wrong. I'm doing a demo today, by the way. I guarantee you don't want to ever close a laptop whenever you've got a Windows domain controller, Active Directory running in a VM, and your Mac is bound to that. So it's enough of an embarrassment that some will avoid demos altogether, and others are going to make a little quick prayer right before the demo. Usually it goes something like, hopefully the demo gods will be kind to me. And so I offer this chicken. There it is. All right. So, my coworker, though, he's a fearless presenter. And he said, I never worry about that. And I said, why? This is what he told me. This sums up his confidence in himself as well as technology. He knows what he's doing. So your confidence as an administrator comes from knowing what you're doing. And that's why we gather at conferences like this, so that we can all learn from each other and know a little bit more about the technologies that we're supporting. So we need to build confidence in ourselves. I'm going to subtitle this session of Science and Chickens, because as administrators we may sometimes apply technology without necessarily knowing how it works, which isn't necessarily a bad thing either, as long as we eventually learn how it works. The configuration profile, which we'll be talking about today, is one of Apple's most powerful tools for managing a Mac. But a lot of people I've seen avoid configuration profiles, or they might just take advantage of what's already built in, not really go any further. So making it do what they want really involves some voodoo, maybe a little bit of prayer. There's no need to sacrifice any more chickens. If we apply a little technology, creating custom configuration profiles can be simple by spending a little bit of time just learning how they work. So with that, let's get started. Everything that we want to do with configuration profiles starts at the plist, so I'm going to be starting there. This is where the magic happens. We're going to spend some time answering these questions. What is a plist and what does it do? Where do we find plists? What's in a plist? And most importantly, how can we manage those plists? So let's talk about what they do first. Using plists, we can do things like configure devices. Now, in this example that I'm showing here, I can use a plist to control these first two Bluetooth settings that you see up here. And these are the settings that actually control those Bluetooth setup assistants that pop up over the login window. So if you're ever doing something like a remote headless Mac and you have to remote control it, you get into it for the first time and all of a sudden, oh, there's no keyboard attached. Would you like to set up a Bluetooth keyboard? No, close. There is no close button. You have to wait for it to go away. Or the same thing for the mouse. There is no mouse. Would you like to set up a Bluetooth mouse? With configuration profiles, we can make that go away. Using plists, we can also customize settings. In this example, a plist can set the computer's time zone. And it can also set the computer's time server. If you have an internal server, configuration profiles can control plists to take care of that for you. Plists let us enforce application preferences. Administrators may want to allow iTunes for the users, but disallow certain network features such as streaming podcasts or connecting to personal music to download or shared network libraries. You can turn that off and you can enforce it. P-lists let us enforce security settings. While Apple and Jamf both offer built-in configuration profile payloads that require a password to unlock a screensaver, what neither of them does include is the ability to set that idle time beforehand. So in other words, wait 15 minutes before the screensaver kicks in, then lock the computer. Neither one offers us the ability to set that delay time between the time the screensaver has kicked in and when the computer actually locks. Usually I like to give my users about a minute or so that they can notice, oh, screensaver's kicked in, I can wiggle the mouse, and then they don't have to put in their password right away. So with managing P-lists, we can do all three. We can enforce a screensaver lock. We can set that idle time ahead of time before the screensaver kicks in, and we can set that little delay time between the screensaver and when the computer actually locks. So right there is the idle time that I'm talking about. This is inside the screensaver system preferences. Right here is what I'm talking about when I say I want to enforce a screensaver, and then also that 1 minute idle time. I'll be talking a little bit more about that. So with P-lists, we can also enable certain hidden features in applications. These are often tips and tricks that we might find in OS 10 hints or something like that, or maybe similar websites. In this example, P-list can let us see disk utilities hidden debug menu. I can make that just appear automatically. Normally it's hidden, and the only way you're going to ever get that debug menu is by editing the P-list. So if you use a configuration profile, if you use this fairly often, you can make it a default. You can push it out to everybody or certain computers. With P-list, we can improve the user experience by eliminating all that clutter that people see whenever applications start up. So if we install Microsoft Office and we launch any application, the first thing we see is this dialog box right here. And the very first option that it's talking about is, hey, would you like to turn on automatic updates? Well, if you're a standard user, you can't really update yourself. So it doesn't really help the standard user. So it's pretty much useless to them. The second item that you see up here, would you like to join the Customer Experience Improvement Program? Most end users probably have no idea what that is, so why even show it to them? Your company may not even like for that information to leave the network and go back to Microsoft. Regardless of how benign it might be, some companies might consider that to be a security flaw or a security issue, and they might want to stop that. So with P-list, we can turn that off. All right, so we click Continue. And then also, it starts barraging the user with a whole bunch of dialogues and windows and startup screens until you finally get to the blank document. With P-list, we can turn all of that stuff off, and we can give the user the experience that we would prefer he have, which is the first time I double-click Word, the first time I double-click Excel, anything, I go straight to my document. So, as I've started to allude to, we're going to be talking about managing preferences, and management starts with P-lists. This is just a handful of the things that P-lists can do for you. Science. All right, so that's what P-lists do and what they are. Let's talk about where we find P-lists now. When I open the Applications folder, I can right-click almost any application bundle and say, or control-click it and say Show Package Contents. In this example, I'm choosing to show the contents of Omni Outliner, and when I look inside the contents folder, I see inside the app an info.plist. So that's one place where you can findplists. You'll also find plists used in launch agents and launch daemons. Typically, you're going to find those in the system library, the main library, and each user's library folder. So this is the main library. Library preferences. That's where you're going to find a lot of plists that really control a lot of the computer settings. And then also the user's home folder library preferences. And then there's a new place that we get to look for them now, library containers. So if you look inside your home folder and you go into the library folder there, you're going to see a folder called containers. It hasn't been there very long. Once you navigate into the containers folder, you're going to see a whole bunch of folders that are typically named after the applications themselves. So in this example here, I'm showing Apple Remote Desktop. Don't worry about the whole path here. You'll find it once you get in there. But I'm showing Apple Remote Desktop. I go into the Apple Remote Desktop folder, and then there's a data folder. I go from the data folder down, and eventually, lo and behold, I find another library folder. Inside that library folder, I find another preferences folder. But what's really kind of interesting about this, and I'm not sure if you can see it up here or not, almost everything in the preferences folder is an alias, except for one file. And that one file generally is a regular file that applies to that particular application. This is Apple's sandboxing at work. But this is where a lot of those preferences are now going. And if you look even deep enough, you're going to find plists in OS X's hidden system folders. Private var db, there's more stuff there. All right, so plists are everywhere. They're all over the computer. But these are the only three places that you really need to be concerned about. Don't worry about the application preferences. Don't worry about the ones that are in the hidden folders. Worry about the ones that are in the main library preferences, the user's home folder library preferences, and then the user's library containers folder. And by manageable, I mean these are settings that we can centrally control. We'll be using something like either Jamf Software's Casper or Apple's Profile Manager to do all these management. Using something like defaults or plist buddy, where you actually go in and change a plist, that's not management. That's setting a default. What management does is it actually puts a layer on top and does not modify the plist. So if you remove the management, everything comes back to the way it was to begin with, its original state. And it's a little bit different from those MCX settings where we also had the ability to do the once and then also the at every login. With profiles natively, and I put that in little finger air quotes here, natively, you can't do that. All right, so we've talked about what plists are and what they do. We've talked about where to find them. Now, let's talk about what's in the plist that's interesting. First, let's talk about the name. The Finder's plist file looks like this. It's com.apple.finder.plist. All right, so the name isn't really that important with regard to management. But what is important, and there's nothing special about the way it's constructed other than what I'm getting ready to talk to you about. What is important, though, is that the application that uses that plist is pretty much coded to look for that name of the plist. That's all there is to it. Now, why are they so strangely named? All right, let's work our way from end to beginning here. Plist, that's a file extension. We're all familiar with file extensions. It helps the Finder determine what applications can open up this file. Something like TextEdit or TextWrangler, BBEdit, most any text application can open a plist. They're nothing but text files for the most part. The part right before the plist is going to be talking about the application generally that it's intended for. So in this case, Finder, it's very logically named. You shouldn't have a hard time finding the plist once you know what you're looking for. Again, there's nothing structured into that. It's just the Finder. But what happens, though, when our system has two applications with the same name? Now, it doesn't happen too often, I'll admit that, but there is a foolproof way that Apple has given us to make sure that we can name these plist files uniquely. And that's where the developer's internet domain name comes from. This is generally the web domain name presence written backwards. Now, web domain names are unique. Web, internet. We have an entire organization named ICANN that is responsible for domain name registration. And plists are simply piggybacking off of that uniqueness. So on the World Wide Web, there is only one organization that can advertise itself as apple.com, and that's Apple. So plists are named based on this unique naming convention as well. And it helps avoid what's called domain conflict. In other words, as long as a developer names his plist based on his organization's web domain name, he should never have to worry about another developer's application tromping on his own preference file. The word domain generally means area of responsibility, and the entire plist name, sans plist, is called a domain. In other words, this is the domain for the Finder. The domain preferences, I guess you could say, the domain preferences file for the Finder. From now on, I'll pretty much be referring to that as the domain. All right. How do we look at a plist file? If you double-click a plist file and you let it open up in TextEdit, which it probably will by default, you're going to see a lot of gibberish. Not really something that's easy to read. That's because Apple's storing all of its plist files in binary format. So you have a few options that you can use to actually view these plists. The first one, tap the space bar. Use Quick Look. If you highlight a plist, you tap the space bar, it'll open up, and it'll actually show it to you in something that's a lot more readable. The other way that you can look at it is to use the command line, and you can say you can use the plutil convert method here, and all I'm doing is calling plutil, saying convert to XML1. In other words, take it out of binary, put it into XML, something that I can read it, and then I can go through and open it in whatever plain text editor I want. Now, what I've got written up here is on 2 lines, and I only did that to make it fit on the slide. That backslash that you see there on the very first line, you can get rid of that, put it all together. That's the entire command right there. Is it raining? Yeah. Goodness. So, my favorite way to view plists, though, is using BBEdit or Text Wrangler from Barebones. And I like them because they're text editors on steroids, and they can do some really cool stuff, including opening a plist that's in binary format and presenting it to you as XML. And whenever you go to save, it'll put it right back. So, and I also love how it adds like numbers on the side. It gives me color coding. It makes looking at plists so much easier. So much easier. So I highly recommend checking these guys out. I am not paid by them in any way. I'm just a very satisfied customer. BBEdit costs money. It is kind of expensive, but it's worth it. But if anything, avoid TextEdit. Get Text Wrangler. It's free. And you can do so much that you can already do in BBEdit. Definitely recommend those programs for you for plists. All right, now that we can actually open a plist, let's look at iTunes. So in other words, I'm looking at the com.apple, the iTunes domain in a sense. They can be pretty dense to read sometimes, but they're generally easy to read through, and they're thoughtfully written out. So if we start off here at the top, P-lists are nothing but XML files. And this part up here is just commentary. It's just telling you this is a P-list file and here's the DTD for it. The DTD stands for document type definition, probably more than you guys even really care to know about. But that part starts off the P-list. You can pretty much ignore it. Now, if we start going in a little bit further, the part that we're interested in, though, are the parts between the beginning P-list tag and the end P-list tag. That's practically everything else. Inside those P-list tags, we usually start off with a dictionary. And dictionary here actually means what you know dictionary to mean, like the Webster's Dictionary. It will contain a list of items in alphabetical order, and then it will give a definition or value for what those items mean. So right here, I've color-coded, just to highlight them, making them a little bit easier to stand out, 6 different properties for this particular iTunes P-list. One thing that you should always notice about any kind of property is that there's always 2 parts to it. We have the key, which is the first part of it, and then we have the value, which is always on the next line, or possibly the next several lines. So the key is always enclosed in the tag. We have a beginning key tag, and we have an ending key tag. In our dictionary, the key is the word that we're looking up. In this case, we're viewing the key that controls whether or not we restrict movies in iTunes. So in other words, the value is always following the key on the next line, and it can be one of several values. In this case, do we restrict movies? False. So no, we let them go, but we can change that to true. And then whoever's using iTunes would not be able to view movies or download movies. I'm not sure exactly what this one controls. If we were to change that false to true, that makes sense. But if we were to change it, say, to 42, Hitchhiker's Guide reference, iTunes would have no idea what it's talking about. So whenever we're looking and dealing with P-lists and you're going through and modifying them or copying parts out of them, as we're going to be doing a little bit later, make sure you get the right type of value, and you'll have to specify it. So here's another type of property, last sync date, and we have a value that's called date. And this is in like ISO 8601 format. Another type of value that we can have is integers. These are whole numbers, not fractions, but just whole numbers, anything positive. Another type of value that we can have are real. Now here I'm only showing 117, but because it's a real number, it could be minus 117, it could be 117.5, a real number, anything that's on the scale of numbers. And we can also have a value of string. You'll see this one a lot. This is usually about 65,000 characters or so, and it can be almost any type of character that you can imagine. And you're going to probably see a lot of this. Just shake your head. Data is kind of like, this is a big blob, and typically it's storing something like maybe a small icon file in base64 encoded format. You're 99% of the time never going to be managing something like this, but recognize it when you see it. It's a big blob of stuff. And then finally, here's what I was talking about earlier. You can have a key, and the value does start on the next line, but the value could be multiple things. So in this case, radio stations. I can have 3 different kinds of radio stations as a list and make that a single value. Everybody with me so far on that? All right. So, I always got to get a Star Wars reference in here too. Yes? There will never be multiple values. Never be. Oh, so what I showed you here is called an array. So the array itself is one value, and then the array is actually a list of different things. So great question. And that's actually why I always bring up my Yoda reference here. Because even though we are looking at 3 different things here, it does look like 3 different values. No, it is only one value. There is only one key, one value, ever, in a plist. All right, so by now you're probably thinking, Bill, I thought we were talking about configuration profiles. Plists are really interesting, but what are we going to do with them? So, verily, I say unto you, understanding plists is the foundation for making custom configuration profiles, which is why I've spent a lot of time talking about them. So, now that we've talked about what they are, where we can find them, what's in them, let's start talking about how do we manage them. All right, let's recap here. Applications must use plist before we can create custom configuration profiles. Plist. Plist must live in the main library folder of the root, at the root of the drive, or they must live in a home folder, a user's home folder in his library preferences folder, or plist must live in the user's library containers folder. Finally, we need to be able to locate the key and the value of the properties that we're looking at. All right, that's everything that I've covered so far. So before we do talk about managing applications using configuration profiles, let's talk about the unmanageable. And while Apple has defined a standard for storing preferences, not all developers follow Apple standards. Anybody know who I'm getting ready to talk about? So I apologize in advance, or right now as a matter of fact. Whenever I wrote the session description, I actually made it sound like we were going to be managing Adobe applications using configuration profiles. I wanted to talk about Adobe applications. I wanted to make sure we got this part in here. I did not mean to mislead you and say that we would be managing Adobe applications with configuration profiles. We simply can't. It's just not possible. But I did want to mention Adobe because they are so widespread. So why is Adobe unmanageable? What are they doing? I'm not going to say they're doing it wrong. They're doing it their way. I'm going to be politically correct about that. Adobe is not storing their preferences in plist format. First thing. Also, whenever it does store them in the application preferences, oh boy, it's buried. In this case, it's storing the preferences in the user's home folder, library preferences, or containers. It's even using, but it buries them in library preferences, application name, version number, localization, and then you've got a whole bunch of different preference files, none of which are plists. So the interesting thing about this is when they are not plists, you'll see like the very first item, the one that says appprefs.xml. Plists are XML. Adobe's got something started here. But I looked in that file after I'd been working in an Adobe application for a while, and I didn't find any preferences in that file, even though it says prefs. Where they're storing their stuff is a crapshoot. I think it's probably in this one that says, oh, InDesign defaults. Even though you've changed the settings, it's no longer defaults. Fortunately, most everything else that I mentioned in my session description is manageable. We've got our iLife applications, we've got Apple Remote Desktop, we've got iWork applications, we've even got Microsoft Office. So non-system applications, that's what we're here talking about so that we can manage those. Apple requires also that Mac App Store applications be sandboxed. So you're probably going to be in luck managing Mac App Store apps. I'm not going to guarantee it. But if they have to be sandboxed, chances are they're in plist format, they're going into containers, you'll be able to manage Mac App Stores apps. All right. So I'm going to show in these slides coming up here how to create 2 different configuration profiles and then I'm going to demonstrate manually what I would do in order to create some configuration profiles in just a little bit. So let's start with the security configuration profile for locking the screensaver. So first, we have to determine the preferences we need to set. And the first place that we should check is in System Preferences, Desktop, and Screensaver. And we're looking at the Start After drop-down menu right here, the one that says Never right now. So that's the first thing that we're looking for. All right, knowing what we do about the locations of the p-lists, let's get here, whoop, come back here. Can't scroll on this. Oh well. Knowing what we know about the location of p-lists, knowing what this looks like, where do you think we're going to find this p-list? Anyone? Which library preferences? User, exactly. And what's an easy way to figure out that it's going to be the user's library preference? Well, exactly, right there. There's no lock icon. Anytime that a user can come in here and he doesn't have to unlock a preference, he can set it for himself. He's actually setting the preference in his own home folder. If we have to unlock that lock icon in the lower left-hand corner before we can set a preference, then we can pretty much say we need to look in the main library. So in this case, there is no lock icon. We're going to look in the user's home folder for this particular preference. All right, the other preferences that we're interested in managing here, System Preferences, Security, and Privacy. So we can set two of them here. This is where we enable the option to require the password after the screensaver begins. And, come back here. This is also where we set the delay time between the time the screensaver kicks in and when the computer actually locks. And again, I like to set this for about a minute so that the user has a chance to wiggle the mouse and wake up the screen before he has to put in his password. They get really cranky when they have to put in their passwords all the time. All right, so with our screensaver in default state, let's go look for the plist file. Now, all of the settings are user configurable, which means we'll start looking in our home folder. We have two places to check. We have library preferences and we have library containers. We also hope that the plist is logically named. Most are. So if we're looking for something that's, in this case, we're looking at setting the OS X screensaver. What's the very first thing of the plist file's name that we should be looking for? com.apple, exactly. This is OS X. It is made by Apple. Therefore, we're looking for a plist that starts off com.apple. Again, hoping that the plist is named logically, something representative of what it's talking about. We look for something like screensaver, and lo and behold, we do find one. We have com.apple.screensaver.plist. All right. Tap the space bar just to get a quick look, make sure we're in the right place. What's the one way that we can quickly verify this? Quick look. Once reviewing the plist, let's look at the keys. And remember, these are the names of the preferences. Each key is the name of those preferences that we're looking at. If we look at the two keys here, we see two of them that are actually kind of interesting looking. We have ask for password, and we have ask for password delay. So we're probably in the right place. We found our plist that we need to go manage, or our domain that we're going to go manage. We're not actually going to change the plist. All right. We verified it using Quick Look. We're going to open it up now in Text Wrangler or BBEdit, whatever our favorite text editor is. And we're going to copy the entire contents of this plist file to just a blank document, just to kind of give us a reference point for later. All right, so we're taking everything that we've got now, kind of holding it off onto the side. That way we've got a pristine version of what the plist looks like. All right, let's go back and make our screensaver change settings. So in the desktop and screensaver pane, we'll see the start after time, and let's set that to 10 minutes. And then we will come back in here into security and preferences. We will check the box that says, yes, I want to enforce the screensaver, require a password, and I want to set the delay before the screen actually locks to 1 minute. And that's all the changes that we need to make. At this point, if we open the plist now in Text Wrangler, we can see some things have changed. The ask for password key is now 1 instead of 0. And generally when we see this, we're deciding something is either true or false. In this case, integers 0 and 1 for Boolean true and false. Sometimes those are interchangeable. In other words, sometimes you can replace integer 1 with true. Sometimes you can't. I would stick with whatever the plist gives you. Even though this is really a true or false, it's on or off, it says it's an integer and that's what it wants. We'll go for that. We'll let it have that. Also, the ask for password delay. That says 60 now instead of 0. We set that for a minute, so we can probably guarantee that 60 in this case is referring to 60 seconds. All right, so we know we're working in seconds here. We're still missing something though. Where's our setting to control the time before the screensaver kicks in? So this third key that you see here, the token removal action, doesn't look promising. It doesn't look promising at all. That's not going to help us out. And we do know that with our administrator we didn't set this with our administrator privileges, so that preference has to be somewhere in our user home folder, but where? All right, after a little sleuthing, we appear to have a fourth place for plists, and that is inside the user's home folder, library preferences by hosts. The by host folder is scary looking sometimes, but everything in there is still just a plist. These are preferences that are specific to a particular machine. They're generally stored here in case the user's home folder is on a network, or maybe his home folder is on an external hard drive, and he might be taking that home folder to multiple computers. By hosts allow him to set certain settings specific to a computer without having to worry that they're not going to work on another computer. So the plist looks just like those in the user's library preferences folder, but they do contain a little bit more information. And if I look closely, I do see another com.apple.screensaver blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah plist. That blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah is the UUID of the computer. That's how OS X knows this is for that particular computer. All right, so we have 4 places to look for plists, but I promise that should be the last. Now let's look inside this particular plist. Again, this is the by host plist. Interestingly, I find idle time. That's what I'm looking for. And its value is set to 600. Just like the ask for password delay was 60 seconds, we can assume the 600 here is talking 10 minutes. That's good. So we found what we're after. Now, I'm going to take all of these settings, these 3 different keys that I've found, and I'm going to copy and paste those into my new file. All right, so I'm including the keys for requiring the password to unlock the screen. I'm including the key to set the amount of time before the screen locks after the screensaver is kicked in, and I'm including the key to set the amount of time before the screensaver starts. Notice that I'm omitting that token removal action key and its value. It's not going to do me any good. It's cruft. So I've got a plist now containing only the preferences that I'm interested in managing. All right, so finally, I will save this to a text file on my desktop. The name isn't terribly important, but it's going on my desktop. I want to be able to recognize it later. I'm just going to go ahead and name it just like the regular file, com.apple.screensaver.plist. Nothing more special than that. All right, so here's where we start actually turning it into a profile. We're going to take our specially crafted plist and we're going to upload it into Apple's Profile Manager. But first, I'm going to start over in the server application. And I'm going to create a new group. You don't have to do this, but I find it handy because that way I can keep everything kind of separate. And this particular group I'm just going to call Screensaver Lock. This allows me to apply configuration profiles based on group as opposed to throwing it out to everybody and making everybody have to use the same thing. So a quick stop over into Server Manager or into the server app, and then we just create that group called Screensaver Lock. Now, here's where we actually open up Profile Manager. And remember, Profile Manager is web-based, so we're going to use a web browser like Safari to go into it. I'm going to select my group on the left, and then I'm going to select my new Screensaver Lock group that I just created. And then finally, I'm going to click the Settings tab. Oh, sorry, Settings, and then the Edit button under the Settings tab. All right, when I get in here, I like to keep my profile name simple. So on the next screen right here, I'm just going to double click that profile name. I don't like where it says settings for everything. Everything starts off with settings. I'm just going to get rid of the settings for and leave it as Screensaver Lock. This is what we'll actually see as our configuration profile name. All right. So on the left side, I'm going to click the general payload information. And then this payload is always required, by the way. And then over here, I'm just going to give it my company name. I always use Talking Moose Industries for my demos. And I'll set the description for this profile to enable Screensaver Lock after 10 minutes with a 1-minute delay. So I've given it a name, I've given it a description. All right, on the left side, I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom. And I should see the custom settings payload. Remember, none of these pre-configured payloads that we just scrolled through have all the necessary settings that we want. That's why we are creating this configuration profile manually. All right, let's click the Configure button. The first thing I'll do is enter the preference domain name, which is com.apple.screensaver. And that's basically the same name as the plist, sans plist. At this point, I could start adding each of those keys and values for my screensaver, but I'm going to click this upload button. I find this a lot easier. After I click the upload button, I'm given an open dialog. I'm going to go choose my custom plist that I just created and click the choose button. And the file is imported and all the keys are completed. Everything that we had in that file is right there. And then finally we click the OK button. All right, last thing I have to do before this is ready, I have to click Save. And then once I have clicked Save, the download button right here becomes available. This is how I'm going to test my new configuration profile. So I'll go ahead and click the download button. It downloads, and then typically, automatically, System Preferences will open. And if it doesn't, you can always go into your downloads folder where it did download, and you can just double click on the .mobile config file. That's what we've just downloaded, is the Screensaver Lock mobile config file. And when prompted, I'll go ahead and click the Continue button here. And when prompted again, I'll go ahead and click Install. And at that point, we're looking at System Preferences, and our Screensaver Lock profile is now installed, and the changes should be immediate. All right, let's go look at our settings now. We're back into the desktop and Screensaver's System Preference pane, and we'll notice that the ability to change the idle time is now dimmed. It's inaccessible. You can't change it. Now, there's certain things that are kind of interesting about whenever an application gets managed. They all kind of behave and react a little bit differently. You'll notice it still says never. Don't worry about that in this particular case. You're going to always have to test your configuration profiles, but because it says never, that's nothing really to be alarmed about. Wait 10 minutes, and then you'll see your screensaver kick in. If we also go back into security, what's really kind of cool about this is that we have our 1-minute delay and we have that preference checked to require a screensaver password. But notice that I've got the lock icon in the lower left-hand corner unlocked right now. Even with it unlocked, though, those preferences are dimmed and unchangeable. There's no way the user is going to be able to set those without removing the configuration profile. All right. So, any questions about how we create the plist, look for the parts of the plist, upload them into configuration? Yes, Profile Manager.
So in the case of screensaver, you had one in the user library folder and one in the by host folder, and you were able to mix and match its keys and values into one?
I was. In this particular case, I'm not going to say, so what he's asking is, in my example that I gave here, I actually mixed preferences from 2 different plist files. And he's saying, can you do that? I'm not going to say always. I'm definitely not going to say you always can. In this case, it worked out just fine for me. There will be certain times when you're going to come across plists that have values that are indented far left or far to the right and buried. I've still never found a good way to manage those, even with configuration profiles. You should be able to. I never get those to work reliably. So one of the reasons I didn't cover the screensaver module was because I can't get that to work reliably for me. But if it's at that first indent level in the dictionary, generally I have good luck managing those when they're from the same domains. So in other words, the same com.apple.screensaver domain. So good question. Thank you. Yeah?
Kind of raised a curiosity for me on that subject is that is it possible to clobber values and have like conflicting values in one plist and they're subservient in another one? Or which ones will have priority, system or user?
That's a good question. If you have preferences, if you have keys and values, properties, from the same domains, but you have, let's say, 2 different sets that you're managing. So you've got a configuration profile that has com.apple.screensaver, and the only thing that it's got in it is I want to set this 20-minute or 10-minute lock. And if you have a second configuration profile that is also for the same domain, but it's only managing one of the others, generally that works for me. So again, I'm not going to say that's always going to be the case, because chances are once I do, there's going to be something that throws it up. But yes, you should be able, should being the operative word, be able to have configuration profiles managing the same domains, so long as those keys and values that it's managing are different. Yeah?
Once you created that profile and uploaded the XML file that you created with those settings, do you need to keep that
No.
XML file where you had uploaded it from?
Nope. It's done. Once we've uploaded it, we don't need to keep that file anymore. So in other words, we're not referring back to that file once we've created our configuration profile. Yeah.
Where is it important? All right, so when you uploaded it into the custom area of the profile management and said, okay, now here I enter the domain name, I'm taking it that that domain name is where you're signaling to the operating system, these are the key value pairs that I want you to affect, or can that be any bloody thing you want it to be? How does the system know?
So the domain name for an application, the preferences domain preferences are named com.company.application. It's the same thing as the plist file name minus plist. It's got to be that, because that's what the application is looking for, is that particular file or that domain. All right. Yes. You can't even see, can you?
If you are stuck in a situation where you have to have one of the files in the by host folder, how have you gotten around distributing those, with that unique ID and the file name?
You don't have to. In this case, what I ended up doing here, and this is what you probably couldn't see from where you were at, the idle time key and its value of 600 seconds was the only thing in that by host file that I was interested in. And I was able to actually take that and put it into the main com.apple.screensaver plist that I created. They're the same domain. Right. Yeah, they're the same domain, com.apple.screensaver. So even though the by host file has additional information in its name, that additional information is only regarding the computer. It doesn't have anything to do with the domain that it's controlling. In other words, the screensaver preferences.
So in theory, then?
In theory, yes.
In theory, if you took one of those, some other esoteric setting, I'm not necessarily speaking to the screensaver, but just something that shows up in that by host folder. If you were to strip out the ID and move it into its parent folder, the preferences folder, in theory that would work?
I don't know about moving it. Possibly. I've never tried it. So what he's asking is, would it be possible if I find something that I want in the by host file and I move that into the same domain file as the main library, as my user's library preferences file, that domain, will that still work? I don't know. And stripping, yeah. Keep in mind, there's probably already a plist file there for that domain. By host files generally are secondary to what's already in preferences and control things that are only specific to the computer. Otherwise, there's no need to put it into the by host preferences. It would just go into the main library, or the user's main library preferences folder.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Certainly does. Thank you.
All right, great. Yes?
Okay, so I'm in the call to start the screensaver for 30 minutes.
All right.
Assistant, without me knowing, makes one that starts screensaver in 5 minutes. And their assistant says never runs the screensaver. They all put them in, what's wrong?
Let's talk afterwards. That's troubleshooting. I don't have a good answer for that. So we've only got 22 minutes left. Here's where the chicken comes in. So what I've demonstrated is how to do this in Profile Manager from Apple. What I'm going to demonstrate live is how to do this for Microsoft Office and all those windows that came up. So earlier I showed you this right here, where the first run that anybody goes through with Office comes up with all of these windows the first time he double clicks Word or Excel or PowerPoint before he even gets to this Word page. We want to get rid of all that. All right. Science and chicken. All right. Is that going to kick in? I've got parallels running, but there we go. That's what I'm after. So this is a VM that I'm working in here so that I can do a little bit of testing here. If I go into Applications, and I look for Microsoft, I've got my applications. I have Microsoft installed. I've not run Microsoft Office yet under this user. So let's double click on Word. And this is the typical user experience. Haven't found how to get rid of that, but I promise one of these days I will. That's an Apple thing. All right, first thing that happens, Microsoft Office says, okay, let's personalize your Office. Okay. And I'll do Martin Moose, Talking Moose Industries. And I click continue. We'll get there. All right, next thing the user sees is, all right, do you want to keep up to date? Sure. Of course I want to keep up to date. I'm the end user. I want the best, the latest, the greatest. Do you want to join the Customer Experience Improvement Program? I don't know what it is. Sure. And then I'll click continue. Oh, all right, thank you. Now I'll click done. All right, Word's launching. Great. Now at this point, I don't have an internet connection here, but this is when auto update would kick in saying, hey, you're missing an update. Would you like to update now? So that's a window that would be popping up. And then once I've updated, I've relaunched Word. Now I get the Welcome to Word window. Great. Okay, let's click continue and go to our document. Oh, no, we're not going to go to our document yet. We have to choose what kind of document we want. All right, so we'll choose a Word document. And then we get to our blank document. This is where we want users to start. All right, so I'm going to quit Word. And going to move this off to the side here. If I go into my home folder, I need to go into my library preferences folder. And hopefully most of you guys know this, but if I say show view options while I'm in my home folder, I can check this little guy right here, show library folder. That way I can get into it without having to worry about shenanigans here. So I go into the library folder. I go into my preferences folder. I see com.apple. What should I be looking for name-wise? com.microsoft. Lo and behold, I've got a few com.microsoft P-lists already. Now the one thing I haven't done for this demonstration is actually launched all the applications. This is probably one of the things you should do. Launch all the applications that you want to capture first. In this case, to save time, I've only done just Word. But let's make sure we're in the right place. So auto update. If I tap the space bar, I do quick look. And I just kind of pour through this. Unfortunately, there's no easy way to know what the keys are supposed to be named. You have to kind of do a little bit of sleuthing here. But I notice down here toward the very bottom, I've got a key here called How to Check. And right now, it's set to automatic because I said, yes, notify me about automatic updates. So later on, what I'll probably want to do is go back in and set that to manual and see what that value changes to. It will change to manual. And then another thing that I've done that I know just from testing, I have to have this other preference right here, this last update, and I have to give it some date just because it wants a date. So I know for my auto update, that's my P-list that I want. I would do that for error reporting. I would do that for Office. If I tap the space bar on that, you're going to see this is a long, long P-list. If I start scrolling, and there's a lot of that data that I was telling you about, you can pretty much ignore all of that. But there's a lot of stuff in here that I need to go through and look for. And I wish I could tell you an easy way to find all those keys and values that you want. What I do, and this is one of the reasons why I like Text Wrangler and BB Edit, if I copy everything into a blank document, then go make my changes, I can use BB Edit and Text Wrangler to compare the two front documents, and it will show me line by line what changed. Yes?
If you have Casper's Composer or FS Avenger,
yes,
you can actually, those are things that will monitor the file system and what's happening on it. So you can launch the application, either fire up Composer or FS Avenger, make your change, quit the app, and then see what files changed.
Yes, yes. I have done that before, especially with serial numbers. So what he's talking about is if you want an easier way to find it rather than having to pour through line by line, or at least if you're not sure what P-list you're looking for, FS Avenger, F-S-E-V-E-N-T-E-R, it's an application, or Jamf Software's Composer, or basically any packaging application that has the ability to do a live snapshot. Composer is the only one I've ever seen do that, actually. But Composer has this ability to watch what you're doing as you do it. and then capture all those files rather than taking a before and after snapshot. So super handy to know about that one. If you have any questions, I can talk to you more about it. I've got a copy of it here. All right, at this point, to save a little bit of time, I have already created the files that I need. And if anybody wants a copy of these, let me know. I can get them to you, or I'll post them up on my blog later. But these are all the different plist files that I have found for Office that I need to manage. Auto update, if I quick look that, the only thing that's interesting in this is are these two keys down here. What I've done here is I've put in comments. You can put comments into your plist very similar to what you can do with HTML. Use the open angle bracket, the bang, the exclamation point, and then anything that's in this closing dash close bracket is a comment and will be ignored. But this right here is what I'm interested in. And I've got one for each of the settings that I need to manage. What I've got on here, Safari, is a JSS from Jamf. And how many people are Casper users? Very good amount of you. Okay, good. So I apologize to anybody that's not using it, but I'm showing you different tools here. I'll log in. I'm going to go up to computers, and this is very similar to the process that we did with the Profile Manager. Over here, I'll choose configuration policies. And oops, I've got one in here from earlier. I need to get rid of that. All right, I'm going to make a new profile, and I'm just going to name this one Microsoft Office First Run Settings. I'm going to scroll down until I find the custom settings payload here. Say configure. And now it's asking me again for that preference domain. This is where my files come in. The trick that I've learned is I'm going to upload the file first. And let's look at that here. Let's do auto update first. Choose. I've got my property uploaded. I'm going to copy this now because that is my domain name. And I keep going. I'm going to actually add several preferences here. So I just click plus. Let's upload the next one. See if I can do this all in 12 minutes. And copy. Good. Plus.
Can Profile Manager do this too? This multiple?
Yes, definitely. Oh, it won't.
I was using Profile Manager, and one thing I noticed is you can't have more. They may have fixed this bug since I last used it. We couldn't have more than I believe 9 custom configuration payloads. So once you hit 10, that 10th one will not work.
I'm only doing 7 here, but I'm also using Casper. So that was, we need to do Office. Just a few more to go.
A quick question for the group while we plug through. Do any of the other common tools have the ability to do something like this? Boy Studio or Monkey?
Monkey, you're going to want to wrap it in a package that just installs the profile via the profiles.
Yeah.
Tim Sutton's got a profile package.
PowerPoint and then Word to go. All right. Last one. I need to get that C. And I save. So all of my settings are in here, and if you look right here, this is the first one for auto update. It's showing it kind of in a long string format, but it's essentially the same thing that's in my plist file, except in pretty curly brackets and curly brackets, just putting it all on one line. It's the same information though that's in my file. Now I can click on download. And automatically, Apple's wanting to install this. I don't want to install it this way. If I do, I'll be installing it for myself only. I want to be able to test this. So what I need to do is installing it for user, me, I need to install it for the device. And we can use that, we can do that using the command line. And let's blow this up where we can see it a little bit better. So the command line that I'm going to be doing is sudo profiles-I for install -F, I think file, and then the path to the file that I want to, the path to the profile that I want to install, which I just downloaded. So that is in my downloads folder, Microsoft Office, first run settings, mobile config file. I say return, put in my password. Nope. It's a demo. All right, so I've got it installed now. If I go back to System Preferences, if I quit it and go back into System Preferences, I now see I've got Profiles. If I click on that, I've got my 7 settings. I see all the different settings that I've just uploaded. Now I've got 8 minutes to test this. Best way to test it is in a new user. Make a new user and we'll just call it test. Sounds good. I don't care for a password. And let's do a quick switch over to test. I have no idea how this is going to react. Awesome. All right. We're now in a test user. Again, this test user is brand new. He's never had Office launch before. What happens now when we go to launch Word? It's got to go through fonts. Thank you. One more time.
1, 2, 3,
That's not going on Twitter, is it? All right. So that's the end of my demonstration. Let's get you out. Let's go back to and hide parallels. Go back into you. All right, demo. So with that, we're done. We've examined the role that plists play and how important they are to configuration profiles. We've examined what they do. We've found the 4 locations where we can find manageable plists, what's inside plists, and most importantly, how to manage them using configuration profiles. And as I mentioned earlier, there is no reason to sacrifice any more chickens if we apply a little science. Questions? No? Yes.
Does this apply at the system level? So if you have an AD bound Mac and you're causing network users to log in for the first time, and network home folders come into play and they've never logged into the system before, do they receive this plist as their primary plist?
If you've installed the configuration profile, it's a management layer on top of their plist. So what we're installing does not affect what they have, it overrides what they have. So regardless of whether they're a network user or a local home user, you should be able to push those out and still get the same management effect. Yeah.
Kind of following up on that, I think if you look on the client, I think in library, main library, managed preferences, isn't that where the plist you've created actually lands?
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely. And that's going more into troubleshooting and how it works, but you're absolutely right. All the, I've already switched out of it, but all of the configuration profiles, as I put them on there, actually creates another subset of plists in the main library folder. In other words, the top library folder, not the user's library folder, into a managed preferences folder, and then per user in there. But again, that's more troubleshooting and how it works. I just wanted to show you how to do custom profiles. Yes?
What's the advantage to setting this up with profiles versus just dropping the plists in the given area?
Because if you drop plist, so he's asking what's the advantage of profiles over just copying plist into the right place? Management. When you copy plist onto a user's computer and into his folder, at that point you can't do anything with it. It's unmanageable. It's unmanaged at that point. The only thing that you'll be able to do is maybe rewrite to that file. But with configuration profiles, again, you're putting the management on top. Once you remove the management, those other plists, those default plists, are still there, untouched.
So what happens when Outlook, doing what it likes to do best, borks itself, and then the only way to fix it is to wipe the plists and start fresh?
So with Outlook, unfortunately, most of it's when you're talking like when the database goes corrupt or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, because I worked in help desk for like, a year or two, and the problem we saw most was Outlook just being a Microsoft product and, doing its thing. And to fix it, most of the time you like wipe the plist, you basically like reinstall, right? And then, I mean, this to me looks like a roadblock to
actually
like my help desk.
I'm thinking it's just the opposite here, and I can't really, somebody saying, okay. I'm thinking it's just the opposite, because plists, the reason they go corrupt is because they're constantly getting written back to. Configuration profiles don't get written to at all. They are there. They are set in stone. They don't change unless you remove them. So if you've ever had I'm thinking that it would actually be beneficial for you to use configuration profiles to manage certain things. Not Outlook is one of those things that doesn't even store its stuff in plist for the most part, not the user data anyway. But that might actually lend to stability as opposed.
Yeah, no, I'm curious to see like if that actually does help anything, or.
Yeah, I would be curious to hear. Hadn't thought about that. I've got one person back here, and we've got 30 seconds. Yes, back here.
When you do profile, you manage just the bits that you put in the configuration profile, and what happens to the rest of the configurations that you don't touch?
It's layered, so it merges.
Okay.
So what you're managing should override, everything else should merge. And with that, time's up, but I'm still glad to answer questions. We're just not recording anymore.